Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Mem. We're going to get started at the very bottom with Amar Rava Amar Rav Nachman at the bottom of Lamed Tet Amud Bet. So what we were talking about yesterday is the idea of protesting and all sorts of details about when you lodge this protest. And then we had a debate between the students of Rabbi Yochanan. Did Rabbi Yochanan say you need to do it in front of 2 people or in front of 3 people? We mentioned that there was also a discussion about canceling a get. And there, I'm just going to point out that Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshet had a disagreement there in Masechet Gittin, in front of how many people do you need to cancel a get? And Rav Nachman said in front of 2, Rav Sheshet said in front of 3. The same Rav Nachman, we're now going to see having an opinion here that moda'a is done before 2. And then we're going to list a whole bunch of other places where he requires 2 witnesses and not 3, and one place where he actually requires 3. And the other issue that Rav Nachman's going to raise here is, if you do something before 2 witnesses, can the 2 witnesses write it down? Do they have the authority to do that even if you didn't tell them to write it down? Or does it need to be that you need to say write it down? If you didn't say write it down, then they can't write it down. And that's going to really break down to, for the most part, is it good for you or not necessarily good for you what you told them? If it's in your best interest, then of course they can write it down. If it's not necessarily going to be in your best interest, then they can't write it down unless you told them to. So let's look through. Amar Rav Nachman. So note that Rava is quoting Rav Nachman because after we quote the whole quote, Rava is going to have a problem with one of the an issue with one of the statements. We're going to have 5 different cases that Rav Nachman is going to discuss and how many people it needs to be done in front of. Moda'a b'fnei shnayim ve'ein tzarich lomar k'tovu. So when you lodge a protest, you do it in front of 2 people, and you don't need to tell them to write it down. They can decide they want to write it down because it's always in your best interest to have a record of your protest. Moda'a, because again, it will prevent someone from living in your land. Moda'a b'fnei shnayim ve'ein tzarich lomar k'tovu. Okay, what's a moda'a? If somebody forces you, let's say, to sell something, and you don't really want to sell it, but you're forced into it. So you go to the sale and you sign your name on the document, I'm selling it, but the day before or sometime before, you give a declaration. It's like a disclaimer, but more than really a disclaimer, because what you're basically saying is, what I'm going to do tomorrow, I just want you to know this was done under duress. And you testify before the witnesses and say this was done under duress. And then later, after the sale, you can claim, oh, it wasn't a valid sale. I didn't really mean it. Because look, I made a declaration previously. I know the one place that we have declarations like this nowadays, and that you all should be somewhat familiar with if you do what's called Hadran Nidarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah. There's a text one's supposed to say to nullify their vows. You can find it in a Rosh Hashanah Machzor. And at the end of the thing, it says, that basically any vows I plan to take in the coming year will be already nullified from the beginning. In other words, you're saying, oh, any vow I take, I don't really mean it. Okay, so when I do it later, I already told you in the beginning, I don't really mean it. It's a little bit of a different use of a moda'a, but it's the same idea. Before I actually do something, I'm going to prevent some future thing that's from actually taking place, taking hold. And obviously it's in my best interest for this moda'a to be there because I'm forced into doing something I don't want to do. So of course they can write it down. If I admit that I owe you money, this is going to be different. This I can do before 2 people, they're witnesses, and then they can go to the person and say, oh, Michelle says she owes you money. Okay, but sarich lomar k'tovu, but they can't write it unless I tell them. And why is this? There's a number of different reasons given. One reason is because this is actually bad for me. So now I did admit it, but basically it's going to be hard for me to claim I paid back, especially if there's a written document. If there's a written document, the malva can always come and claim you didn't pay. Now, usually what happens is if there's a written document, I tear it up. But in this case, there's a further problem, which is if the witnesses go and write it up, and I don't even know that they write it up, and it gets to the malva's hands, well, when I go pay the loan back, I won't know that there was a document, so I won't know that it needs ripping. That's another issue. Another issue is if we have an oral loan, which here apparently there wasn't a shtar, that's why I needed to admit that I owed you money, then it's not connected to any property. But if there's a written document that says I owe you money, then any property I sell after that will be liened to the loan. So it's really not in my best interest that this be written down. And that's why, unless I told the witnesses to write it down, they can't write it down. Kinyan b'fnei shnayim. If I do, usually we call this like a handkerchief kinyan, a symbolic act, which we've seen many, many times. It turns something into much more formal, serious, shows seriousness of purpose. So that's done before two people also. But I don't have to tell them to write it because I did a kinyan. We're going to get back to this and say why. Maybe I don't mean that it should be written, because here it's similar actually more to the hoda'a, because I'm admitting that, let's say I say I'm selling you this item, and then basically I've done a kinyan and I've showed that it's yours, not mine. So we'll get back to that. Kiyum shtarot b'shlosha. If we have a document, we want to validate the signatures, that's done always in front of a court. So here's the first thing that Rav Nachman says: you really need a court for. You need 3 people, and then there's just a siman for the 4 things he only needs 2 for, and that's memhak. Again, macha'a, moda'a, hoda'a, and kinyan. I'm a Rava. So now, after quoting this statement of Rav Nachman, Rava says, "Ikasha li hakasha." If I'm going to have a difficulty, it's specifically on what I already mentioned, the kinyan. Hi kinyan hechidami. What exactly is the case of this kinyan? And then it's, how do we treat kinyan, and why is it 2, but it can be written? Because if it's like a court, right? If it's such a serious thing that it's like it was done by the court and ratified by the court, then you should need it to be done in front of 3 people. If it's not like it was done by the court, then no. By the way, once something is done in front of a court, of course, it can be written because the court writes everything down. So that's why I would explain why it gets written, and I wouldn't need to give my approval to it. But if it's not like a Maaseh Beit Din, then why don't I have to write ketubah? It should be more like a hoda'ah. It's like an admission of mine that I'm giving something to you, and then you can then come claim it for me, or that will cause me a loss. It's not necessarily in my best interest. So Batra Debaya Hadar Pashta, after he asked the question, he then answered the question himself. La'olam lav k'maaseh Beit Din dami. It's really not like a Maaseh Beit Din. And hachataima mai de'eno tzarich lamar tovu. Why don't you need to tell them, write it then, and they can write it without your approval. Mishum destam kinyan l'ktiva omed. And this goes back to what we said before, that whenever you want to show seriousness of purpose, you do a kinyan. And therefore, by doing a kinyan, it's as if you wrote it down. So therefore, it shows such intention to actually do this action that you don't need to tell them that they can write it. Now we're going to go back to the issue of moda'a. Rabba v'Rav Yosef to Amr Travayo, and that's going to be our topic for the rest of today. They both said, Lo katvina moda'a ela aman de lo tzayitina. If I'm forced to sell something, and I basically write a moda'a, listen, tomorrow I'm going to sign this document, I don't really mean to do it. It's only, according to Rabba and Rav Yosef, it's only if the person who's forcing me is not a person who's going to listen to the court. And therefore, meaning, basically, if it is someone who will listen to the court, I have to bring them to court. I can't sign this sale document that I don't really mean and just give a moda'a about it. No. If they're going to listen to the court, then I have to bring them to court. Abai and Rabba both said, even if it's people like us, even if it's people who will listen to the court, you still can write a moda'a. Some people explain, why is this? Well, either the power of moda'a is so strong that it doesn't really matter, or perhaps there are people who listen to the court in general, but maybe they won't listen to the court here. Or maybe there's no court in town. Sometimes that happens. There's no judges around. They're out of town. Okay, so basically, Abai and Rabba say you can always do this. And Rabba and Rav Yosef limit it to a case where you're really just concerned that the person isn't going to listen to the court, and that's why you don't bring it to court, but you do it in this kind of manner. Amr Nahardea. In Nahardea, they said the following. Kol moda'a de lo ktiv be anan yad'ina be ba'onse deplanya lav moda'ahi. So in the Hardea, they said that any moda'a that doesn't say, I know, we know, when the witnesses want to write down this moda'a, they have to say, we know ones deplanya. And if they don't say that we know, we're aware of the fact that this person is being forced into it, lav moda'ahi. It's not a moda'a. What this is basically saying is a moda'a doesn't work unless the witnesses know, and it's not enough for the person to say, oh, listen, I'm going to do this sale and I really don't mean it. Okay. I'm being forced into it. That's not enough. The person's word alone is not sufficient. The Eidim need to know and have seen that the person was actually forced. So the Gemara is going to question this a little. And we're going to talk about what possible cases could there be moda'a. We talked about it in a sale, but the truth is it could be in other cases as well. Like, for example, moda'a demai. So what kind of moda'a are we talking about here? Idigita udematanta. What if it's the husband's giving a get? We all know that the husband can't give a get if he was forced into it. So unless he was forced until the point where he says, I want to. That's why we put sanctions on men who don't give gets to their wives. But if he really doesn't want to do it, okay, and feels like he's being forced, it doesn't matter whether the force is true or not true. It doesn't matter if the witnesses know about it. As long as the husband says, oh, tomorrow I'm going to court to give the get and I don't really mean it, well, then that's a get given without his will. It doesn't matter what the truth is if the witnesses knew or not that he was being forced by the court or by the wife or whatever it is. The point is, as long as he doesn't want to give the get with his own on his own volition, you know, with his own will, doesn't want to give it and isn't really giving it with seriousness, with agreeing to it, or same thing with a gift. If I give a gift and then I don't really want to give the gift, well, then there's no meaning to the gift that I gave. So it doesn't matter if the witnesses knew or didn't know that there was force going on here. It really makes no difference. So that, and the Gemara says it in these words, Gilu milta ba'almihi. All we need is to know that the person felt pressured to do it and didn't really mean it. That's all. Once we have that, it's not valid. Obviously, this is going to create problems because if he actually gave her a get, I know what you're all thinking, you know, well, what is this woman? She thinks she has a get. So it would have to be where he brings in the moda'a to the court and says, you know, I really didn't mean to do this. And it's obviously miserable for the woman, but that's the whole, right? That's why we're in a problem always with misulavot get, with women who can't get their gets, because men actually have a lot of control here to be able to do this. And how to change this, a whole separate story, and how to make things better in this world and how to make improvements is, you know, there's a lot of people working on that. Hopefully, you know, they've already made some things better. Hopefully we'll make lots of strides in this area over the next number of years. Okay, so that's the get and matana. I can't be there referring to that. And idis vine, we're talking about a sale like we spoke about before. And there we're saying basically that you can only give a moda'a if the witnesses, or you can only write it if the witnesses are aware of the problem. Well, right, that the person's being forced to sell their house, let's say. But Rava says, now Rava never explicitly says this, but they claim that based on Gemara, we'll get to in a few dapim. Rava seems to say there is no such thing as a moda'a on a sale. Okay, why is this? Well, the commentaries explain that theoretically, every sale you're kind of forced into it, because what is a sale? A sale is I want to get money instead of my object or my house, right? I'm selling my house. Often, now, not always, but a lot of times in those days, people sold houses because they needed cash, or money. So they sell their house because they need the money, but they write a moda'a the day before saying, I don't really mean to sell it. I'm being forced. Now, if there's really no external force, right? So now let's just go through. Forget the witnesses. But here, the person just claims, right, goes to witnesses, says, oh, I don't really want to sell my land. And then goes the next day, sells the land, gets the money, has the money, which is exactly what the person needed, money. Time goes by, they get a better job, and they don't need money anymore. And they're willing to give back that money because they're fine, or they invested the money and made more money off of it. And now they go back, pull out the moda'a. They want their house back now. So they pull out the moda'a and say, oh, by the way, I never really sold you my house. Okay, now anyone who does that can do this and mess up the person who bought it from them. And that's not fair and legit. So that's why Rava says, you don't write moda'ot for a sale. So it can't be that. So what on earth was Nehardea talking about when Nehardea, they said, the witnesses have to know the issue in order to write this moda'a. To which the Gemara answers, La'olam dizvine, we really are talking about a sale. And even though Rava said you can't write a moda'a on a sale, well, mode Rava hechadanis. Rava agrees though. Now the case I described, there was an internal onus. The person was feeling forced to sell it because they needed the cash. That's not the same. But when there's real onus, like Kima said de Pardesa, like the case of this Pardesa, which we're going to see right now, about a Pardes, about an orchard, there was an external, in other words, really the other side was pressuring. And in that kind of case, we're going to see right now what the case was. Rava will agree that you can write a moda'a, but only when the witnesses are aware of the onus. Because if they're not aware of the onus, it's the person's word, and maybe they're lying, maybe they're making it up, because they really just want to be able to have the option to opt out of the sale later on when they get cash. So let's see the case. Dahu Gavra de Mashkem Pardesa. And this story is going to sound familiar because we've seen it already a bunch of times. Somebody gave up, we saw things like this. I mean, this actual case came up in Bava Metzia, but we've seen the same concept of this mashkanta de sura, where basically someone takes your land. Okay, you lent me money, you take my land for collateral, and you're eating every year, you're taking the produce and taking that against my loan. Well, you live there for lechavre letlachnin. Okay, you took my collateral for 3 years. Batar de'ach letlachne chazaka. After you enjoyed the produce, got the benefits for 3 years, amal, you blackmailed me. And what do you say? Imazavna limuta. If you sell it to me, great. That would be fabulous. I want to buy this, you say to me, and I would love you to sell it to me, and I'm happy to pay you money for it. Ve'ilo, here comes the blackmail part. But if you don't sell it to me, kavish the shtar mashkanta, I'll hide the shtar mashkan that says that this was a collateral. Amina lekuchi biyadi, and I'll say I bought it. And remember, I'm supposed to protest, but I didn't protest for whatever reason, and you blackmail me. Now, because you basically say, well, then I'll give you nothing. I'll just claim it's mine and I'll be believed in court because I've been living there for 3 years and you didn't protest. And ki agavna katbina moda'a. So if you blackmail me in this way, I can actually sell it to you, but write a moda'a before. And the witnesses, if they're aware of the moda'a, then we can write it. And I'm sorry, they're aware of the fact that the owner's forcing me to sell it. Then we write this moda'a. And then even if I go ahead and sell it, the moda'a will be valid. And that's a case where Nahardea said you could do it, but it would have to be where the witnesses are aware also of this issue. Otherwise, it's my word against the other guy's word. Amar Rav Yehuda. Now we're going to get into this other topic, which at first seems unconnected, but we will connect it back to moda'a. Hai matanta tmirta lo magbinam. If I write a gift to you and I do it in secret, then we assume that I didn't really mean it. And therefore, you can't claim that it's yours. Because why would I do something in secret if not that I was, maybe trying to hide something? I was trying to do it in a way I didn't want people to know about it because maybe it's not really mine. Let's say I sell you my house and it turns out it's not really my house. Well, when people get word that I sold it, they'll come and start claiming, oh, this land is my land. So basically, we assume if I'm doing something in secret, right, it always doesn't smell right when someone's doing something secretive. So we say you can't collect based on this document. So what would be considered a document done in secret? So Rav Yosef says it's a case where I said to witnesses, go hide somewhere and write the document in hiding. Some people say, Amar Rav Yosef, the Rav Yosef said, so some people say that Rav Yosef said, no, if I didn't tell you, go write it in the shuk and go outside and write it, then it's already considered that I said it in secret. Okay, so according to the second version of Rav Yosef, I have to be much more active in order to make sure that I was clear that I want you to write it in public. Okay, so we'll see in a second. What's the difference between them? If I didn't say anything and I just said go write it, well, according to the first Rav Yosef, that's not called in secret unless I told you go hide and do it. But according to the second version, if I just told you go write it, but I didn't say go write it in public, that's already secret and that's not a valid document. It's a bit of an extreme position. I'm a Rava. Now here comes the connection to our topic. Rava comes and says, "V'havya moda'a lechaverta." Now, why else would I write this document if I didn't have some meaning? So Rava says, even though we're going to eventually say he doesn't really say this, and it's hard to really understand the connection, and then the Gemara will reject this connection, but Rava says, we assume that why'd you write this document in secret? Because what you really meant was to be a moda'a for some future sale, which means that when you actually go ahead and do a sale with this property, you can then pull out this document you wrote in secret, which you were never planning to use and not a valid document, but you were using it to say, you're going to pull it out and say, oh, look, I wrote this document to someone else because I didn't really mean to sell it to you. Why this would work, it's a good question. It doesn't really make so much sense. And the truth is, I'm not going to get into it too much because right now, as I said, we're going to reject this understanding of what Rava said. Rava never really said this. They inferred it from some story and they misunderstood. So let's see the story. Dahu Gavra, there was a person, he went to betroth a woman. Amrale, she said to him, okay, smart woman, although maybe not too smart, we'll see. Or avinalach, probably they add right, le'itita. I will be happy to be your wife as long as you give me all your money. Will you write to me all your money, that you're going to give it all to me? Well, elo, right? And if not, lo avinalach. In other words, I'll be your wife if you write to me all your property. If not, I won't be. Now, this sounds like a condition, but we're going to see she didn't do it as a condition to the betrothal. Like when he actually came down to the betrothal, what happened? He promised her, okay, he writes to her all his stuff, okay, and basically goes and betroths her. Now, when they did the betrothal, the commentaries say she didn't say on condition that you give me all your possessions, because, you know, they kind of dealt with it already, and she didn't say it, which basically allows him to do a little bit of trickery here. So what happened? Now his son, the eldest son, comes and says to him, what's going to be? He talks about himself in the third person. This guy, meaning me. What's going to be with me? What, you gave away all my property? Like, this was my inheritance. Amar luhu l'sadeh. So he said to witnesses, Zilu itmuru ba'avar yamina, go stand on the east side of the city, or the right side of the city, whatever right means. Uktuvule, although we did see yamin could be Taimana, could be south, but whatever it is, go to the side of the city and write a document, meaning go write a document in hiding to write all my possessions to my son. Now, there's a debate, even though the Gemara said he wrote her all the nechassim before, it's not clear if he actually wrote them already or just promised her he would. And when the son got wind of it, he said this, and according to the Rashbam, he wrote this before, and then after wrote the document selling it to the woman. And then he had this secret document that he wrote in secret that basically says, I gave everything to my son already, which means I can't promise, you know, it's very nice I wrote this document to you, but I had already written it all to my son, which is kind of like a moda'a, right? It's like saying, oh, well, the sale I'm going to do tomorrow, it's not really a sale because I already gave it all to somebody else. So that's why I say she wasn't so smart. Maybe she asked for too much and it was, you know, she got way too far, and as a result, she got tricked. So what happens? Atu the kamei de Rava. So they go before Rava. Amar lahu lo markan ava lo markan. The child didn't get anything, the son, because it was a document written in secret, and we don't accept documents written in secret. And she doesn't get it. Now, why doesn't she get it? So man de chaza, the ones who saw the Rava said this, saver mishum dahabi moda'a lechaverta, said, oh, well, it's because a document in secret must be a moda'a. And that's why did he write that document to the son, especially if it wasn't going to be a valid document? He wrote it so that he could pull it out later and use as a moda'a. That's what they thought, and that's why they thought that according to Rava, the secret document could serve as a moda'a for any future sale. But lohi, that's not true. Why is it not true? Because this is a different situation. Because it's clear that he was forced into doing this. Now, force is an interesting word here. It's not like she put a gun to his head, but he really wanted to marry her, and the only way she'd be willing to marry him was if he promised her all his money. So he was forced into selling all the money, didn't really mean it, and that's why the moda'a is effective, because again, as we saw before, this goes with what we saw earlier. If it's a clear onus, then this, okay, it's different than before, but it's the same idea about there being a clear cut. Everyone knew, or people knew, there were witnesses that heard her say that to him. They knew that he was forced to do it, and therefore it was legitimate when he claimed later, I was forced to do this, and that's why I wrote all my property to my son, to basically then be able to get out of the sale and show that I didn't really mean it when I gave it all to her. But in a regular case, if I decide in secret, right, to write a document in secret to sell land to someone, which I don't really mean, because why am I doing it in secret if not because, you know, I don't really want people to know, and maybe I don't really want to do it, and therefore it's not a valid document. But if I then go sell the property to someone else, do we assume, well, if last time I wrote in secret, then right, the one in secret is indicative that I don't really want to sell this land ever? No, those two things are totally unconnected. In other words, maybe I wanted to give it to person number two. I didn't really want to give it to person number one. So when person number one came to buy it, I said, oh yeah, write the document in secret. I didn't really want to give it to them. And that's why that's not valid. But it could be, what's the connection between that and a month or 2 months or 3 years later, I go and sell it to somebody else. It has nothing to do with one, has nothing to do with the other. This clearly had all to do with each other, and it was clear because she was forcing him. So again, you have to look at the circumstances, and that helps you understand what the meaning of these documents are. So what we did today was we had the 5 cases: the mecha'a, moda'a, hoda'a, kinyan, kiyum shtarot. How many witnesses, and can the witnesses write it down without checking with the person? And we saw the differences in the different cases. Then after Rabbi quoted this in the name of Rav Nachman, Rabbi himself had a question about the kinyan, and we talked about why kinyan is different. Well, even if it's not in your interest, if you already did a kinyan, though, you show that you're willing to have it written down. Then we had a debate about the moda'a, about can you write a moda'a even if the person will go to the court? You have to bring them to court instead of writing a moda'a. Like, is a moda'a not ideal and it's only what you do in unideal circumstances or not? Now, Harda then said that the witnesses have to know about the onus, and then we had to figure out what case is it, not get, not to not. They're the witnesses, as long as they hear the person give the moda'a, that's sufficient. So all you need to know is what was the owner thinking. But if it's a sale, then you do, even though sales, you can't really use a moda'a. But in the case where they know that there's real outside external forces being forced on this person to do it, then you can have that, and they can write the moda'a on a sale. And then we talked about this hidden, right, this gift done in secret, which we end up saying is not valid. We thought it could serve as a moda'a according to something Rav said, but then no, only in a case where there's really some clear forced going on here, then perhaps you can use it as a moda'a, but otherwise it wouldn't be considered a moda'a at all. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a great day and a Shavua Tov.